also. And if you want along the way, feel free to use the chat function. You can also use the good old Teams feature of raising your hand. But with that said, let me just give it to you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you. So we're here today to talk about composable design and how we are doing it at having multiple projects at Salling Group using the same code and making it very easy to integrate to different providers and interchanging them, which is the core of composable design overall, is the ability to just take providers of certain parts of your code and change them out as you see fit. So I promised Janus that I will do a very fast introduction about Salling Group, and then we'll dive straight into it. I sit at Salling Group as a front-end manager with a small team of around 22 front-end developers. But yeah, Salling Group is Denmark's biggest retailer with a strong portfolio with both brick and mortar and online businesses, as well as a lot of convenience things such as home delivery and meal boxes, etc. And we use our efforts to improve everyday life for all of our customers. We have around 10 million customers each year, and we employ around 62,000 employees. At Salling Group, we try to innovate as much as possible and use a lot of digital solutions. So we have both, if you see the shopping cart here, and the image is something we introduced this year, where you can drop your groceries into the basket and they will automatically scan them, and you can just walk right through checkout instead of having to take them up on the conveyor belt at the cashier. We also have these Bilka to go containers around Denmark, since not every place in Denmark has a decent distance to Bilka. We have placed these containers where you can order your groceries and have them delivered there. Then you just enter a code when you arrive, and your groceries will be picked by this robot inside, and everything will be pre-packed. What you can also do is order it to a store, where you drive to our check-in stand, type in your phone number, and it will direct you to a lane, and then someone from the store will come out and fill out your trunk with all of your groceries without you ever having to leave the car. And the team that makes it possible is the digital team of Salling Group. We are around 120 people in digital, working with everything from content, CMS, back-end, front-end, marketing, etc. But what I want to put a focus on today is the front-end team, which is divided in the sense that we work on multiple teams or multiple projects. We're one team of around 22 developers, but we're divided into these 3 sub-teams: non-food, food, and home delivery, each using similar technologies, but at the same time not quite the same, which we'll also dive a bit into in a bit. Yeah, we work and learn together in the way that we have these shared packages that my talk will be primarily about, and then we host these bi-weekly knowledge sharing sessions where we share whatever knowledge we've learned either on the job or at conferences, or if we saw a cool blog post or similar. But let's dive into some of the projects real quick. So we have our non-food, which is all of our big businesses that don't sell food, or the stores themselves sell food, but the website doesn't. So we have Føtex, BR, and Bilka, and they're built with Vue and Nox.js, and then hosted as static sites on Netlify. Bilka to go, similar, Vue and Nox.js, hosted on Netlify. They also have a native app built in Swift for iOS and Kotlin for Android. And then we have our newest project, Føtex Home Delivery, which is built with React.js and Next.js, and again hosted fully statically on Netlify. On top of that, we also have a customer program that helped the customers get a ton of different benefits, both promotion-wise, but also being able to share shopping carts, etc. But if you rewind a little, then we can see where we used to be. It was a dark and scary place where we had the monolith solutions, meaning that the front-end developers had to download the whole application, both front-end and back-end, which required them to install different tools. And in turn, we couldn't use MacBooks that most front-enders prefer because of ASP.NET, etc., being a requirement. We also had a lot of downtime while deploying. We kind of solved it by doing nightly builds, but if something went bad during the deploy, it would take a long time to roll back. And instead, now that it's fully static for the front end, we can just deploy by pressing a button in Netlify. And if something goes wrong, it takes less than 5 seconds to roll back to the previous build, and no one would have noticed any difference. We also had a lot of duplicate implementations as we're working on different projects, but with kind of the same tech spec or requirements. It required us to develop the same things, but they would all act sort of differently since they're different developers, and that might take a different approach to the implementations. So the solution, at least partly, was to go headless, where we had loosely coupled services, which also mean that we have it has its own challenges with this, because when you're not connected to the backend, it's hard to figure out the perfect integration. To solve this, we use the TypeScript by default, and we do this because when you run small-scale applications, it's very important that developers are familiar with the project and that it's easy to write. But with large scale that we are working on with many developers, people will be very unfamiliar with the project, and therefore it must be very easy to remove, or to read. Similarly, we also had issues with our static site generation, because we have a lot of different products. Some of the projects have up to 70,000 products. And then you go in the non-food example, go times that by 3, since it's 3 different websites, but with sort of similar assortment. Build times became increasingly long. So some of our first builds actually took more than an hour to deploy whenever we were providing code changes. We sorted that out ourselves with some build scripts or build hooks that they go in and spawn a worker for each core on the CPU. And that kind of reduced it. It made it half the time. But luckily now the different frameworks also provide the solution themselves. So it's much faster now, and not an issue for us anymore. Similarly, in our deploy previews, we also only generate what we want to test instead of everything. So it's easier and faster for us to test our solution. And as I mentioned, we had different implementations across all the projects. And in order to solve that, we introduced what we call the shared packages, where we have identified several parts of our code that we could take and create these packages for. And the packages are shared functionality that we can then reuse and extend, similar to building blocks across our applications. So we started out by identifying what parts of our application we thought would make sense to take a look at and make a shared packages for. We haven't made it for all of them yet, but we started out with several of them, and we'll take a dive into that as well later on. The benefit of this is that it's much faster to go to market with our implementations. We implement the feature once in one project, and then we can easily migrate existing projects by implementing our package, or we can spin up an entirely new project with the feature out of the box. By that, we reduce both the time and the complexity needed to change out engines behind the scenes by not having a direct coupling as well. We get higher quality because it becomes much easier to test each part of the application by separating the concern of each package away from the core. And it ensures that we have the consistent behavior across all of our projects. And then the part that I think is most important is that it promotes cross-project collaboration. So as I mentioned, we are working on 3 different projects, meaning that we don't have the direct contact with each other every day. But by creating these shared packages and working on them together, then we work as one team and we avoid these knowledge silos. We get much more flexibility when planning as well, because anyone from any project can step in at any time and help on a different project. The way we've created these packages is by using a microservice kind of architecture, where we've separated it into 4 layers. So we have our request handlers that sends actual requests to our different APIs, where we created 2 different handlers, a token request and for authentication, etc. And then a normal request handler if the service didn't require authentication. Then we had a API layer, which would be the part or a class that directly contacts the service that we are talking to. On top of that, we implemented services that is then implemented directly in our application and holds all the state required for the project to work. And then we have these customer-facing and UI components, where we've also created the adapters for each framework. So we have both Vue.js and React.js adapters. Then we can take a quick dive into how the APIs look. So by default, an API integration is just a class. So in this example, we have a basket API that takes in our request handlers. It can then, in this case, get the state or get the basket, and it can get a recommended basket. So based on your basket, we can recommend some products. Each of these have some interfaces in the base implementation of an API that then has to be filled out to ensure that we have similar behavior. So if we change the backend at some point, it just has to implement this get basket and add to basket, etc., that the class already knows of. Our services are the ones that then contain state. It also has actions to mutate state, and it has a lot of different getters that you can use in your application to fetch state. It's Flux compliant, so it's very similar to Redux, where you have a unidirectional flow with a single source of updates, meaning that you set an action and then that action will modify some state and everything else will react to that state. The tools that we are using to implement this is RxJS behind the scene, because it works very seamlessly in the way that most of the front-end frameworks work today with reactive state. So whenever a change happens, you have subscribed to something, and you will react in your front end as well, and reflect those changes. So the way you implement the service again is that you have a class that can then extend our base service and implement in this case, the basket service design, where we have a certain amount of different functions that has to be implemented. So if we wanted to change out our basket service, it would be super simple, because you know exactly what parts of the contract you need to fulfill in order to be used in the front end. Yeah. So an action sends an update. It dispatches the event to our event hub. As soon as this happens, we will set a state saying loading or similar to
Hey Siri,
connected to that action.
Rasmus Walter.
Come again?
I think there was somebody that wasn't on mute. Here you go. I'll
All
put
right.
on mute again. Nice one.
All right. Then if the action throws an error, we will dispatch an error so you can react to it in the front end. If the action succeeds, then we will dispatch a success event similarly, so you can react to that on top of modifying the state. We can take a quick look into how our packages has evolved over the past year time when we've implemented it. We have a core, some services, quite a few services by now, and actually more than what we see here. Then we have our different APIs and the adapters that we created. So we created one for both React, Vue 2 and Vue 3. So you use or consume the package in the same way in all frameworks, even though they're completely different, and it makes it very native to use. the approach that we took is to plan it according to our existing roadmaps. So we decided that it was hard to get the time required or the resources required from each project without actually giving the POs a benefit of the project or of the package. So we tried to figure out if one project is about to implement a new feature that would touch on any of these packages that we identified, then it would be part of that task to create if it doesn't exist, or to implement it in the package if there was some features that was missing. Similarly, we assigned code owners to each project or each package, and we try to promote this in-house open source approach where everyone can and should contribute. In the sense that we have a GitHub repository with all the packages, kind of a monorepo setup, where if your project is lacking a feature or you found a bug, you create an issue, and then we have working groups every week that takes a look at these open issues and open pull requests and make sure that there's actually something happening to them rather than just stalling, as it could potentially block a project from completing a task. Are we there yet? Not quite. We still have a lot of stuff that we want to work on, both in the way we assign resources to it. We want to get even more traction than what we do now, but also we've only managed to implement 3 of the 7 places that we identified that we could have use of such a shared package. We figured these are the 3 low-hanging fruits. Search is something that every site is using. At the start, we were using 2 different providers. Now we're just using Algolia, so a single provider. But we were looking into creating the API by the time that it was decided that all projects should migrate to the same. Tracking is something that we historically have struggled with, and I think most businesses do when they have many projects, because we want to be able to compare like for like on all our projects how they are performing, and it's very hard to do that unless you have very strict rules on what kind of events should be sent in what format, and having that completely out of control of the developer by saying, here's a service with a set of events that you can implement, and it takes a product that is structured in this way. And if you send just that and send the event that you want, then we can assure that it's the same on all our projects, and therefore we can compare it like for like over time. And then authentication, we use the same provider on all projects. We actually have a Salling Group profile that you log in on all the sites. So it made perfect sense that we had a unified implementation of that. Yeah.
Great. We made
I think that's what I had today.
40 slides in about less than 40 seconds each, but thank you very much, Martin. Along the way, we had a comment from Bernd on mentioning Vue and Nuxt. Sounds like the same stack like Vue storefront. Can you elaborate if you just used a synonym or went for a vanilla implementation?
Yeah, so what I was saying is Vue plus Nuxt is the same stack, but with React, we have React plus Next. So they're very similar sounding, but it's not quite the same. It's 2 very different libraries and very different format, but similar. You could easily import one of our packages with our Vue adapter into Vue storefront, say, as an example.
All right, very good. Any other questions?
Yeah,
comment?
for the packages themselves, we wrote them with completely vanilla JavaScript and TypeScript, and then they use RxJS as our library to deal with the state changes for ease of use.
Cool. Any other questions, comments, reflections? Like I said, you'll get a
yes, I would have a technical question. Basically, how
Yes.
do you stick all those services together? I mean, what is the I mean, I understood that there's you have migrated from ASP, so how do all those microservices get glued together? Do you use some kind of a service bus, like enterprise bus pops up.
Yeah, so
something.
for some of them, we have our own gateway that we also run through for authentication and filtering out bots, etc. But in most cases, we actually interact directly with the services from the front end. I know that when you talk about composable design, most people have a backend for front end or a similar layer where they actually filter it through for you and make it easier to connect to. But we decided kind of skipping that step and making it very composable just right in the front end by creating this API design where you can change it out on the fly.
Right. Thanks.
And then through tree shaking, we of course don't have any extra code with us. We only build in the parts that we actually implement.
I think the task will become more difficult once you start to work on, let's say, stitching together, let's say, search analytics events that might go into recommendations, and you start to build up the whole persona stuff or the personalization layer. I think that will become, you will have to add some kind of a storage or some kind of a, let's say, some modern or new way of storing data.
For personalization and everything, we have our own department that is working with ML and AI, and they have a lot of different recommendation services. And we use tracking ID so we can easily detach it from the user in case the user wants to be forgotten. But we actually use that same data in our stores if you're part of our loyalty program. So if you go down to a local Bilka and check out using your customer program, then when you shop on Bilka online or Bilka to go, you will actually get recommendations based on what you bought down in the store. And that is all stored on this tracking ID that we can then use in the front end as well and use it along with our different services. So it's the same ID that we use across all platforms.
I'm pretty sure that we could talk for hours and hours, because actually the whole setup is pretty interesting. So I looking forward maybe for another talk from you about actually how you do the whole life cycle, with the products and how you add value to the presentation and stuff like that.
I can also highly recommend. There was an award last week where we actually won 3 awards for our ML department. I can highly recommend taking a look at that session, but I can send James the link for that.
Excellent.
I'll make sure to weave it in. And then Mark put a comment in the chat, and it made me think that you didn't mention the content on your website. You didn't mention CMS. Can you share how it fits with what Bilka or Fritext or the other parts of Salling Group has already?
Yeah, so we use Magnolia as our content management system. And we have also looked at Uniform, but I think the idea of Uniform is really good. But I think we because we have such a strong team, by making it native to our applications, we could make something that work more seamlessly than what Uniform provides. But it's definitely something we've taken a look at, because it is a really cool tool, and I think they're really ahead on that part of personalization.
Very good. Any other questions, comments, reflection? Thank you, Martin. This was a quite comprehensive comeback from missing your talk at the Aarhus conference. I know there's a few people here who wanted to see the session, but I see also on the list of names here quite a few who didn't make it to Aarhus. So there's a wonderful bonus that you're able to share. Thank you for taking us through how it used to be, solutions, your approach. I like your emphasis a lot on how it promotes cross-project collaboration. Perhaps you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when I started out at Salling Group, we had the 3 front-end teams, and they were very separate. We weren't socially interacting outside of lunch, maybe, but creating this kind of community within to work on the same goal drive people very closely together. And I'm very proud to say that we have absolutely top-tier social team now that arranges things inside and outside of work without Salling Group's involvement as well. So I definitely see the benefit of promoting this cross-project collaboration.
Would you say also that it's helped with the, some of the other benefits that you mentioned were faster time to market? I know there was a technical part of that too, and the same goes for higher quality, but I would guess that this is connected as well.
Definitely. A friendship kind of barrier or a friendship kind of emphasis makes it much easier to collaborate and provide feedback fast and work closely together, because you don't want to disappoint your colleague already, but you really don't want to disappoint your friend.
There you go. Very good. Thank you, Martin. Unless there are any final questions, now is your chance. You can raise hand or put in a chat. If not, I'll just say thank you very much, Martin. It's not the first time that we finish 1 minute ahead of time, but it's something that happens rarely. But I know December can be a busy month, so now you have an additional minute for free use. Thank you, Martin. Thank you for sharing with us. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
All the best.